Welcome to a Wednesday with Clear Mountain. Today we're joined by Venerable Dhammadinna in Italy. Venerable, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, a brief introduction. It is rare to encounter a monastic who so perfectly bridges the gap between deep scholarship and sincere deep practice, but Venerable Dhammadinna is one. Bhikkhunī Dhammadinnā was born in Italy in 1980 and went forth in Sri Lanka in 2012. She studied Indology, Indo-Iranian philology, and Tibetology at the University of Naples and at the International Research Institute for Advanced Buddhology at Soka University in Tokyo. She obtained her doctorate in 2010 with a dissertation on the Khotanese Book of Zambasta. Her main research interests are early Buddhist discourses and Vinaya texts, with a focus on the theravada and Mulasarvastivada. Did I do it right? I did it right. The formative phases of Mahayana ideologies in Khotan in the 5th and 6th centuries, and the development of the theories, practices, and ideologies of Buddhist meditative traditions. She is currently a research associate professor in the Department of Buddhist Studies of the Dharma Institute of Liberal Arts. And we got to speak with Venerable Dhammadinna kind of just recently, about a week ago, for our first kind of monastic to monastic interaction, and just were so warmed by discovering a kindred spirit, and just delighted that we get to have you join us today. So thank you so much, Venerable. And this is probably too late to ask this, but am I pronouncing your name right, or is it Venerable Dhammadinna?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Ajahn.
Well, on the topic of language, and I apologize if this is embarrassing or imprecise, but how many languages do you know, and what are they? And maybe a more interesting question is, how do each of those languages affect your Dhamma practice or your Dhamma understanding?
I haven't counted them, mostly because not to kind of, but because I'm more like of a book person. So I do know quite few dead languages or living languages, which I rather use as scriptural languages. So, apart from, like European languages, which is, it's quite normal in Europe, if you do Buddhist studies or if you do humanities, that you work with scholarship in different European languages. So in terms of the languages, classical Buddhist languages, I'm not trained as sinologist, I'm not trained as a Japanologist. So I do use those languages, but I'm not fully confident, I wouldn't really consider myself an expert in sinology or anything like that. So I can only read a certain type of Chinese with some effort when I'm working with Chinese Buddhist texts, for example. So my more official, real academic training with languages has more to do with Sanskrit and Tibetan and Khotanese and a few other Middle Iranian languages, which are basically languages that were used for the Buddhist transmission in Central Asia. And then Pāli, Pāli, is my heart language, really. And I didn't really study it formally at university because back in the days, there were no formal Pāli studies in Italy when I studied. So there was absolutely nothing. And I believe even now there is no real Pāli studies program as such. So it was my own heart practice language. So, the interesting thing is that with all this kind of Buddhist languages, whenever I use a non-Indic language, I don't really use these languages per se, but I do see through them, and it's as if the underlying Indic language or text or content kind of comes through. So it's just, they're just like tools. And because of my field of studies, I do Indian Buddhism. So I basically use and hopefully, not misuse these other kind of Buddhist corpuses or corpora or textual bodies just for the sake of working with Indian Buddhist texts. So,
if you would have said you knew 2 languages, that would be impressive for most Americans. So it's great to hear the full response.
Venerable, why is Pāli your heart language?
I mean, I don't have a sacred narrative, and I mean, I'm not now, maintain that this was like the Buddha's language or anything like that. Or, I mean, yeah, most definitely the Buddha did not speak Pali as such, or it's not about that. But I guess it's, just the way I came to, to the Buddha's words in a non-translated form, and it just stuck with me. And it just does something to me. I mean, I cannot really see it in a way that other texts or languages don't do it. And I also think it's a matter of habituation, because I've been reciting and memorizing a few texts over the years. I mean, it's quite a few years now. So somehow you get into that sort of wave and into that mode, and it just speaks to me. So yeah, it's just kind of natural in a way.
Venerable, what was the progression of your interest in Buddhism? Did it start off with languages, or did it start off with the textual study, the scholarship, and then turn to meditation, or did it start with meditation? How did your interest progress? What was your Dhamma door?
Oh yeah, it started with meditation when I was like 16 or so. But of course, yeah, like back in the days, everything was sort of together, new age-ish, Indo, Brahmanical, Buddhist stuff. It was, like some exotic sort of thing, yoga and whatnot. But somehow I got to understand that the practices I was interested in were Buddhist practices. So I started studying Sanskrit on my own, and so just it started like that. And I was just kind of to frame it in some way. And then I went to university. And by the way, in Europe, we didn't have back then this distinction between like college and university. You just go to university. So for for like non-European audiences, when we don't have this notion of going to college, but that's what it means. So when you're basically 18 or so, and so I just felt this is what I wanted to do, and what I was interested in, and I was lucky enough to be able to study something that was so close to my heart. So it went like that.
And when did that I know then you went to, I believe, Taiwan and began teaching in a university. What was the moment that made you move towards actually taking robes? What made you ordain, and what do you feel has sustained you in robes since you did take them on?
Yeah, I mean, this is again one you should have already made the answer for this, but I always forget to to fabricate this answer. So I don't know. I mean, I think this kind of question is a bit difficult in a sense that I think we would all maybe tend to start, and build some kind of self-geography to answer this, or like looking backwards, you are some kind of predestined, monastic or great practitioner, which is not the case. So I think it was multi-causal. It was not just one particular, vision or one particular sort of a breakthrough that led me to that. It was building up over the years, and so it was really like a gradual process. Of course, I was inspired early on, but that being said, also conditions for women to go forth in the theravada tradition, and in general outside the Chinese tradition, are what they are. So, and I wasn't really prepared to, give up my academics interests, which are not about academia per se, or they're not scholastic interests per se, but though they are so close together for me, the practice and the study of the Buddha's teachings. So I wasn't really prepared to give that up in the name of some anti-scholastic tradition, or embracing like a religious persona or religious identity, and turn into a social worker, or like religious social worker or something like that. So until the conditions came together, it was not happening. And I also think that for women, I was of course very restless. I had been wanting to go forth for a long time, and I was being kind of held back by different conditions. And I do think, in a way, you do have to find your own solid ground before you're able to go forth, because you're not going to be received by nurturing, caring system, which is, embracing or adopting you and giving you the setup conditions for your practice and to develop as a person, or to sort yourself out. So I'm not sorted out. I mean, I'm not claiming I'm sorted out, but I do think that it was in a way good to have this delay and, stumbling on this and that, and when having to cultivate, like a way to be with things, and a certain independence, and a certain self-reliance in the practice, so that I think that actually allowed me, not to kind of succumb and not to fall apart so quickly, because I mean it is objectively quite challenging to be robes for a woman in theravada tradition. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really like multiple causes and conditions really kind of coming together.
So am I right that you started teaching in Taiwan, and then you'd already done a lot of language study and were teaching in Taiwan, and then went and ordained, and there are so many ways to be a monastic, and you have, after ordaining, kind of come back, and you're still, publishing papers and doing the scholarship work. How does, how that's, at least from the tradition that we came from, it's a, somewhat anti-scholastic in certain ways, tradition. And how does your academic work, your scholastic work, how does it relate to and inform the rest of your practice of Buddhism and the Dhamma?
Yeah, I have to say it wasn't really the way I had expected it or I had depicted it. I had thought, I will definitely keep going with academic projects or with, the academic study of the Dharma, which is not exactly the same thing as studying the Dharma as a practitioner. I mean, there are like different methodological approaches and also, different time investment and resources. So, I mean, they're not exactly the same modality. So doing Buddhist studies with a background in Buddhist studies and studying Buddhism in a scholastically informed way, but without this kind of methodological background. So that being said, it wasn't really the way I had expected. I mean, my fantasy or imagination was more that, this will be there, but, I'll be, living a more fully meditative life and all of that. But again, if you want to have, a roof above your head as a female monastic, you do need, like a place which allows for that. And the, Dharmadhara mountain, where I have lived for over 10 years, was extremely generous in allowing me to stay. But of course, you then belong to a certain kind of system. And so it's really not that I had chosen it. It was just the way it made it sustainable for me, to have access to support and to just exist in the robes as a monastic. So I think until just quite recently I was still somewhat struggling in a way, or it was a bit of a challenge integrating these two sides. Not in myself really, but more in terms of how you relate to others when you're teaching or when you're talking about the teachings or the texts or the practices. And I don't know, I think with age and maybe also with a little bit more experience in teaching outside the academic context, I've been really feeling as if these two sides are integrated and are coming together. So I've said this before, to friends, but it's as if, I had this more like split identities up until a while ago. And I felt, I don't belong to either world. I don't, fully invest, my sense of, identity, so to say, in like 100% in either kind of field or, side of defense. So, I mean, and even just speaking like that, it does give the kind of perception that there was a bit of an antagonistic sort of, split way of being with these two aspects. But now it's really just coming together. So to say, I just feel whole and I just feel much more integrated. So I just feel myself, in that. I mean, this is just what the practice has been about for me. So I don't feel anymore this sort of, two levels of discourse or two different, even just ways of being socially with others or, even body languaging, all of that. I mean, we are, social animals after all. So I just feel much more natural now and much more, I mean, not having to excuse myself for, having maybe a brain or half a brain. not, and not having to, overstate or overdo the service to compensate, or preempt the accusations of being, some kind of arrogant intellectual jerk or something like that. I mean, that kind. But also, I don't have excuse myself or play the ultra intellectual person for being a practitioner. So I just feel much more authentic, actually, and I do think the two dimensions kind of blending together have been very helpful in coming to this place. Anyway, 45. You're supposed to grow up a bit, so it's also age. It's not, it's not purely intentional. It's just like you grow up a bit eventually.
You, I think first, you don't come across as a dry intellectual at all, Venerable Dhammadinna. You come across warm and very caring. And it's interesting, I feel like the way we did prepare for this interview was by reading some of the stuff you had written. And it seems like one paper which somehow bridges this gap or this place between those two sides of yourself you're talking about integrating is your paper on the Appamana Dhammas, like the Brahma Viharas, so Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha, the Brahma Viharas, so the states of loving kindness, and specifically some of your papers about how, when these are cultivated in the heart, quote unquote, limited karma does not remain and it kind of fades. So it's, there's suttas which reference this. So on one level, it's an intellectual paper. On another level, it seems like you embody these qualities, and it's
I'm not sure.
you probably work at least.
Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah.
So would you speak about just what how do you touch that part of the heart, like metta, and what do you say around that teaching around the limited karma not remaining is kind of potent in a culture that has so much guilt as the West does, and this hope that we're not beyond redemption. Can you just speak to that whole realm from the heart and the head? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that paper is quite ancient. I think maybe it's like 15 years old or so. So maybe, I wouldn't really quite write it in the same way now, but that's it. With this thing of guilt, I think in a way it comes, of course, from this Judeo-Christian conditioning mostly, and also from, in a way, from this monocausal, model that, conditioning that way we tend to carry, as opposed to taking fully on board and at heart, the teachings on dependent arising and co-arising of, different conditions. So somehow exaggerating one's own agency in life, inner agency, outer agency, internal, external agency. So this sort of putting all your eggs into one basket, and this sort of omnipotence that comes, I think, from that kind of conditioning. So I think there is an overstatement in a way. Of course, I'm not against moral responsibility or kind of ethical grounding or, fully acknowledging one's ethical responsibility. But somehow I do think that we do tend to blow our importance out of proportion, even within the kind of ethical field, when it comes to this blame, self-blame, and guilt construct. And in a way it's also part of some kind of ego trip, I think, and of identity or reified identities, views or statements. Let me unpack it. What I mean is that I am, it's already a statement, I am guilty, and I'm so important that I cannot even forgive myself. So there is this sense of, or this, even this idea that I have the power to forgive myself or forgive others. Even this sort of attributing this power to yourself. As if it were in your hands to forgive someone else. As if others don't face the outcomes of their actions. So I do think that this does come from a strong ego investment, and often also it's just, I think, the outcome of sheer Sakaya-ditti, or like identity, reified identity standpoint, and of course conceit, mana, and all this exaggeration of self-importance. So yeah, that's my sense. Around this guilt, thing. And also somehow I also feel it's as if, the ethical foundation is often not quite there, but instead of acknowledging one's shortcomings, one then feels, well, at least I have such a high standard that I am beating myself up. So it's sort of rather than actually mindfully facing and dealing with and self-disclosing to oneself and even to others where one is at, this sort of superimposition of these very high standards is sort of bypassing the real actual connection with the reality of the consequences of one's actions. Anyway, this is my impression. But coming to the Brahmaviharas, I think in interest, or apamanas, which basically means like limitless or boundless, or that which doesn't confine, and also doesn't make your heart subject or liable to being confined. I think this is actually a case in point on how this whole work on the early Buddhist texts and teachings has informed my practice, in the sense that, of course, in the suttas, as probably most of our friends did not this evening know, we don't have this practice that takes up individuals. So we don't go from like a friendly person to like a middly kind of neither too friendly nor unfriendly neutral individual onto the enemy and on. I mean, different exegetical traditions, they spell out these individuals and groups of individuals differently, all the way through eventually breaking the boundaries between these groups. So to say, you reach this boundlessness of this intention and mental state as the end point or culmination of the practice. In the early texts, you already start without solidifying or constructing this self-other perception. So there is this just boundless radiation in every direction. And so the theme of the practice is actually metta itself, or compassion itself, or mudita, sympathetic joy itself, or equanimity. So rather than having beings as objects, you just have the intention of the respective Brahmavihara or boundless state as an object. So in a way, this also can help with avoiding to face individual features, or if they're too disturbing, or what have you. But at the same time, I do think that this kind of practice can also somewhat, I mean, at least this has been my experience, if you if you just use it as a defense mechanism sometimes, or as an avoidance practice, you can so nicely be immersed in this radiation practice, and even go into deeper meditation, but it can become a concept in a way, in the sense that it might not fully 100% really take on board that these directions of space are inhabited by actually living creatures and human beings and non-human beings. So somehow it can get a bit overboard if you're not careful. So, or if it gets somewhat abstract. So the integration, I mean, currently for me is that, it's directional. It's not taking, self or other as targets or themes or objects or recipients of this practice, but it does come from a much deeper understanding that others belong there already. And this, presence of the other or others there, because of this non-constructing the other person as an object of the practice, also avoids this othering, process. So it's not so sort of, the others are there, but they are there in a much more kind of commonality based or fundamentally connected way, which is not about interconnectedness or interbeing, which are like later constructs. I mean, they're not. We don't have this kind of constructs in the early Buddhist tradition as such, and not even in Theravada, in fact. But it more comes from this acknowledgement through mindfulness practice that we do construct our experience. When we are all constructing our experience, we may be constructing it in different ways. When it comes to the particulars, we may be conditioned in different ways, but we are all, constantly creating perceptions of, the earth element, the wind element, the fire element. I mean, not in this particular order of, 4 elements at once. So I think that this integration of mindfulness practice and mindfulness directed to the body, and like 4-element practice, for example, with the Brahma Viharas really tapped. I mean, it has the potential. At least for me, it's had the potential to tap into this, lived togetherness in a way in existence, which is much deeper. So you don't have then to connect or to go into this conatum or momentum to reach out. Like everyone is already there somehow, and we are already sharing this much, fundamentally. So yeah,
That was an amazing answer for 3:30 in the morning. That was so
yeah.
Venerable, I'm curious, the author and teacher who I've read the most teaching this directional or pervading way of practicing the Brahma Viharas is Bhante Analayo, and I know you've worked with him for a long time now, and I'm curious, just what is your relationship with him, both academically, but maybe more importantly, just Dhammically? I mean, he's obviously an amazing scholar and thinker, but also he's a great practitioner. I'm just curious what that's like.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, coming to this integrating scholarship and practice together, I really owe it to him, because before meeting him, I think I met him back in 2006, if I'm not wrong. And, until then, I was more gravitating around the Thai forest tradition as like a living tradition, which is, markedly anti-scholastic and all of that, and anti-doctrinal. And I mean, by then I was already in my PhD studies. So, it had been going on for quite a while already, this academic, track. And somehow until then, I was not quite able to connect the two things together. I was living these two sides in a sort of dissociated way. I cannot even put my finger on that. I was a bit ashamed of that, or living in hiding, or, as I said, overdoing, the kind of sweet, pious, thing, just to be socially accepted within that kind of context. And I mean, I was also and I don't regret it in a way, because I was very young when, I came into contact with those communities. So usually you just take it on board 100%, 1000%. So it does open your heart actually to unquestionably, embrace something. So it does have value. I mean, I'm not throwing that, out of the window at all. Mm-hmm. But these two sides were not together. And also, because I think of this taboo a bit back then over, the whole idea of, practicing with the goal in mind, with the goal of the path, and what for, was, and this kind of unspoken sort of, avoidance of, words like nibbana or liberation or, the end of dukkha was not, there was this sort of discourse around, you just practice for the sake of practicing, and, it's a bit, you just do it for the sake of doing it. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. But somehow when I met Venerable Analayo, it kind of, first this sort of external taboo, but also internal lack of clarity around, being on a certain path, going, for a certain goal, dissipated. Just by meeting him, it totally dissipated. It was, oh, okay. It really kind of dawned upon me what I was doing, what I'd been doing and what for, but it was so totally implicit and so unclear that, it was actually really good for me to have that kind of clarity, which doesn't mean, ending up being goal-oriented or exclusively goal-oriented or, that sort of thing, it's a matter of balance. I mean, you do need to have, the goal on end, but also you have, to practice for the sake of what it does. I mean, how it changes you, moment by moment and day by day. So it's not about, becoming some sort of, ambitious, spiritually ambitious. But that was actually striking for me, and also this was not really my own sense of not being in touch with the possibility of bridging the two sides. But it was just, totally unclear how, and so it basically really, put these two sides together, the clarity about the path, and also that there was not only nothing wrong about, being a young scholar or having this academic interest, but that it could also have a value for others. And then for myself, I mean, I do tend to delusion. So I think, I mean, I do need to, to have this kind of clarity and cultivate clarity. So I think for me, it was also really a matter of cultivating right view time and again. This is really actually what it's been about. It's been really like brainwashing you, yourself, or, time, yeah.
And Venerable, did you live with Bhante and Alio, or is the relationship mostly been just text-based or through calls across different countries? Or
I don't know. We used to spend much more time together in the past because he would come regularly to Taiwan, like twice a year or once a year, and then we would, meet like for a month at a stretch, and then so we would spend quite a lot of time together then, and this went on for many years, and then also we would meet at conferences or teaching together. I mean meditation. So that there has been, I mean, over the kind of last few years, basically we haven't seen each other for a few years, I think after COVID or just before COVID. So it was both in person and also keeping in touch and working together. So it was more, I think for many years, I mean, we didn't even talk about meditation practice as such or dharma as such. It was kind of organic. It was just by doing things together, it just kind of developed in that way.
I have so many questions for you, Venerable. But we also do want to invite people to post them into the chat, and we'll probably keep you a little longer in the live stream than we usually would. The one I'll just settle on to start with is in terms of just beginning to take the teachings into your heart and live them. What for me, there's like a few passages from the canon that just kind of come up again and again in my life and like arise, and they just keep echoing. And I'm wondering if there's which passages from the sutras have just kind of continued to come up in your heart and echo, and do you find yourself thinking about a lot throughout your monastic life or even just these days?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't have one particular passage. I think it changes a lot, and I also think because I've been, so much in close contact with these teachings, it's really like, I mean, I don't want to say background noise in my daily life because it's not noise, but it's just so much there. I mean, I can't really single something out or some kind of dictum or maxim, or or something like that sort of does that for me. Particularly, well, I mean, these days, I mean, I think one of the maybe key phrases or teachings that's been going on for a few years in as by way of background inspiration really is this whole part of the Satipatthana Sutta, so-called refrain or repetition about abiding independently without clinging to anything in the world. And this is not independently like aloof or cut off. It's not, of course, it's not about that. And the world is the world of the six senses, so it's not that's cutting yourself off, but this sense of independence, or the Pali word is anisita or anisita, which is basically the same root as the four requisites. So nisaya, or take independence on your teacher, which is again nisaya. So there is this whole semantic range of wholesome dependence, but can also be, of course, unwholesome dependence, and then being shaken by your own dependence and clinging. So I think this has been very useful for me in the sense of really looking back and and seeing where I was actually clinging and where I do cling and where I do build, even of course without realizing it, this dependency on objectifying things or solidifying things or just relationships or ways of being in the world. And
it feels like much of your life just recently you've talked about kind of this sinking into a certain comfort and willingness to be in seclusion rather than always be in terms of having that distance from the world. Do you feel like that's a relevant teaching in terms of that for you right now, the movement of your monastic life into a more kind of spacious or reclusive phase as well?
Well, I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, I mean, I can't really stick to that much. I've been like now, for example, I mean, for 3 months at University of California at Berkeley teaching, and very much in the front line, socializing and being, with students or colleagues and friends. So basically, like in Taiwan, I was, of course, living on campus, and it's a monastic university, so you do live in community. But being like a theravada practitioner, somehow, like sort of not part of the mainstream Sangha there, did allow me for some kind of space, or for more space than Taiwanese monastics in my same conditions would have. So I did always have like an amount of seclusion or of space. I have to say this has been, I mean, it's been quite lucky. But since I came back to Italy, so in second half of 2019, I've been basically living alone. And so this is really, well, I've been teaching a lot actually. So it's just that my daily life is very quiet, and there is a lot of space, but it's not, I mean, I'm not like a recluse or like total hermit, not quite really. I mean, I don't know whether that's maybe I'm not that kind of person fully, but I mean I'm happy to be alone. I have to say I'm really quite happy to be alone, and maybe again now it's kind of coming into more balance. So it's again I have more social time than I've had in 5 or 6 years, but I do long for also more solitude again. So it's kind of striking a balance, I think.
Venerable, thank you very much. And we've actually got a question from our guest who we interviewed last week, Amma Thanasanti, who is a monastic Siladharan and Bhikkhuni for 25, almost 30 years, monastic for a long time.
Yeah, I first met her when she was a Siladhara in England, actually.
Okay.
So like maybe 25 years ago or so.
Well, a really good question. Venerable, what has helped you metabolize the undigested antipathy toward the feminine in Theravada tradition? And I'd just like to add on there, you wrote a really interesting paper called When Womanhood Matters, Sex Essentialism and Pedagogical Dissonance in Buddhist Discourse, in which you reflect another scholar named Sponberg, who talks about actually soteriological inclusiveness. And maybe just in answering Amma Thanasanti's question, you could point out the different, like Theravada, it's not a monolith. There are different types of Theravada, and
like your good selves, to the extent that you are Theravada monks, maybe you are, like you embody like a different strand of Theravada without this antipathy towards the feminine, for example. Maybe you know what? After all these interviews you've been doing, I should be interviewing you for your next kind of sessions.
Well, no, please, you get the expertise here, please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I cannot say I have, fully digested it, to be honest. It's, I'm not beyond, I mean, my practice is not beyond the level of not responding to feeling humiliated or to feeling, sidelined or discriminated, or so I cannot honestly say that I am beyond that, or I have, fully resolved it. Particularly what I was just noticing like recently is that somehow, I mean, this has actually been quite a realization for me, with all this expectation that you are like a caregiver or a giver or a feeder or nourisher. Somehow, even, I mean, because traditionally non-ordained or non-fully ordained monastics in the Theravada tradition, so these, lives of renunciation, but without the boundaries of Vinaya and without, the protection of Vinaya either, have not meant a full withdrawn away from, this giving or mothering or sistering. So you're not a samana, I mean, you're not an ascetic, you're not a recluse, you're not someone who is stepped out of the societal rules of, doing all of that. So somehow, because of that, there's always been this persistent expectation that you are like nunnish, or you are mothering, and so if you are a kind of secluded female monastic, you are some kind of weirdo. If you are a secluded silent monk, you are maybe just by dint of being silent, you have deep practice and you are cultivating seclusion. And so what I notice is that even among like lay supporters or practitioners, there might be at times a sort of resentment over feeding nuns, materially, in the sense that it's as if you were to be the provider. So I mean, I have support definitely, and I'm not speaking, of course, for friends who are supportive or far or close, but generally speaking, there seems to be this implicit sort of resentment, somewhat, that it's weird that you're not only not earning your own bread, or allegedly not earning your own bread, but you're also not nourishing. So how come you should be nourished? So this is something which is still a bit undigested for me, because instead of this beauty of dependency as a mendicant or a monastic, you get into different dynamics. You get into all kinds of transactions and negotiations. So there is a level of complexity that I don't think as a male monastic you tend to have, generally speaking, I mean, with exceptions. So this aspect of being dependent is quite close to the bone for me, has been quite close to the bone for me as of lately, because it's not fully digested. I mean, I have not quite found a baseline of well-being around that, because it's kind of a bit tiring to negotiate that every time, like claiming your distance or your space or your solitude. So that said, I do think maybe two things have helped me metabolize, or be in the process of metabolizing this antipathy. Is like, one is that really religious institutions, like all human institutions, can't be reformed. They can only be quit for good. So I'm just hoping to be done and dusted with this whole samsaric predicament. I mean, in general, I think it's just, I mean, it's beyond reform, and I think because it's a reflection of the society, so it's going to be a very long-winded historical process, definitely not in my lifetime, not in our lifetime, to see a real change, towards equality, and which is not equality, just, of course, the Bhikkhuni Sangha is subordinated, is asymmetrical vis-a-vis the Bhikkhu Sangha, but it's a more fundamental, level of, respect and coherence. So I think, yeah, on the one hand, I think I've given up on that. I'm not in a bad way, but I have given up on that. And so I just accept it as imperfect as it is. So far so good, or maybe not so good always, but this is, what it is. And secondly, I do think that this background in Buddhist studies, so this being positioned in a way which allows me to see, the long historical or religio-historical tides, the long tides in history, and seeing that this is no novelty. This has been, happening since the very beginnings of the Sangha. So all these movements that, Ajahn Kovilo was pointing to, misogyny and ascetic misogyny and exclusion, etc. So there has been multivocal realities and different voices, different strands, and I do think that knowing that this is the way it is according to historical causes and conditions somehow does bring some equanimity in a sense which is not normative equanimity, like top down. Yeah, okay, this is how it is. No, it's more like it. I mean, you know it that this is how it is, and so I mean, I am a woman. Like it or not, this is what I am in this lifetime. And so I think this is maybe what's also, what's been actually helpful for me.
Thank you very much, Venerable. Speaking deeply to your lived experience of some levels of the institutional misogyny, I'm curious about how you describe or how you think of the Pāli canon in general. So going back to this ideal, when I read the Pāli canon, it's just, I'm rather amazed. Certainly the early Buddhist texts, as they're often framed, it's just this idea of soteriological inclusiveness, it really is such a through line. You find a sutta which is sexist, and it's just striking at how rare it is. It's like 1 out of 1,000, and it's almost like if it's something about women, it's almost like a sutta, the exact same sutta there could be a male version of it, how men are like black snakes or something like this. So how do you, when you're describing the Pāli Canon to someone who's unfamiliar and they ask about, it's 2,600-year-old document, do you feel that on the whole, does it fare well in terms of, in your view, of its lack of sexism, or do you feel it still contains problematic aspects that need to be dealt with in a serious way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, as you said, Venerable, of course, we do have occasional voices which are probably the expression of the early arising of anti-woman or patriarchal concerns and power gains and power assertions. So they're definitely present, and we don't have really the tools to assess how early these voices developed, but it was definitely, I do think we need to be careful and mindful when we are doing comparative studies, and also when we are reading just one tradition per se without the horizontal comparison with the other witnesses to the same age of development of these texts, not to sort of this doesn't quite sit with my modern or postmodern mindset, then it must be a late development. The truth is that probably these voices were present already very much at the Buddha's time, and this was just also the reflection of the prevalent values of the society at the time. So I do think we can coexist with those voices just because they exist. I mean, they've always existed, but I'm with you definitely that these are like marginal voices, and the normative position is definitely one of soteriological inclusiveness, which, by the way, for those who are not familiar with this languaging, soteriology basically means salvation. So this type of term stems from, of course, Judeo-Christian traditions. So in Buddhism, we don't have external salvation through some kind of external agency, although we do need the Buddha's agency in history for liberation or freedom to happen. So in a way, there is also salvation, because it's like we are the disciples of the Buddha. We are not on some kind of self-awakened path wherein this liberation happens in a kind of self-generated manner. So I don't have qualms with using this soteriology or soteriological adjective terminology. So definitely I have to say that this is quite striking in the sense that later Buddhist traditions, with the arising of the Bodhisattva ideal and then the fully fledged establishment of the Bodhisattva ideal, do close down on this. So the normative Mahayana position, at least in terms of the highest goal, which is no longer becoming an arahant as a disciple of the Buddha, but becoming a Buddha yourself, is most definitely soteriologically exclusive tradition, because a female cannot become a Buddha, or you have to basically change your sex just when you are on the brink of becoming a Buddha. I mean, there is kind of conflicting narratives on this, but I do appreciate this aspect of at least this preservation of this normative soteriological inclusiveness, which makes a big difference. And so as far as the Pāli canon goes, this is the reality. But as we know, there is also practical canons, as Anne Blackburn, like a very, very good scholar of the Pāli canon, has called them. So the practical canon, or canons in the plural of theravada, they are not relying mostly on the Sutta Pitaka as we modernist or postmodern Buddhists like to, or people like us who are I wasn't brought up by reading commentaries or reciting commentaries. I was rather brought up, or I brought myself up by reciting and reading the suttas. So, but the reality in lived Theravada traditions is that the suttas are marginal mostly, and so the commentarial views where this misogyny and etc. starts to surface more and more, and exegetical works and all that entire world is actually very impactful. So when we think in terms of the Pali Canon, I think we need to be a bit careful, because probably as non-traditional Buddhists, we do relate to the Pali Canon as a kind of scriptural entity. But the Pali Canon really is the Pali Canon, through the practical canons of theravada, which cannot really care the less at times of, suttas, or, even the Vinaya letter as such, so they embed all of these belief systems at once, and so that's actually what has an impact then, in the life and the imaginaire, so to say, of these communities. So yeah, so yes, it's there is soteriological inclusiveness throughout, even as far as the practical canons of Theravada are concerned, but then the heaviness of the androcentric positions and all of that in the practical canons, I think that does tend to override or overwrite this fundamentally open position.
Thank you, Venerable. And we would usually have wrapped up 5 minutes ago, but I really want to ask you this final question, and then we'll jump over to Zoom, and people are welcome to bring their questions over there. You spoke about the different paths laid out by the Mahayana and Theravada, and you existed in a Mahayana institution for quite a while and have done deep research into the development of the Mahayana in Khotan and elsewhere. So I've heard Ajahn Amaro speak about how strange it is that no one ever asks the Buddha, how do we become a Buddha? How do we become like you? And one of his ideas he put forward was that perhaps, this is redacted afterwards. I think that, I don't know what to think of that, but how do you reconcile these two paths in your own practice and mind? And they're very distinct paths, and you've existed straddling or between two worlds for quite a while. How have you conceived of the two interrelated?
Yeah, I personally, believe that there is clearly indication that the Buddha himself did not propose the bodhisattva ideal, simply because there would have been no point in aspiring to future full awakening when the Buddha was still alive, and when he was the teacher present and accessible then. But early on, with the demise of the Buddha and this passing of time, and concomitantly this apotheosis of the Buddha, and this enhancing his qualities in realistic ways, and also the changes in the notion of awakening itself. So this idea of omniscience, like that the Buddha would have been omniscient with regard to each and every aspect of reality. So this kind of inflation of what the Buddha's mind is about, and what liberating knowledge is about, and what the range of the knowledge of a Buddha is about. So all of this has, gradually, all of this, they have been gradually components leading to the emergence of the Bodhisattva path. So, personally, I am definitely not on the Bodhisattva path. I have no intention to, that's not my overall, I don't want to become a Buddha ever, I'm quite happy, to be a disciple of the Buddha. So that's not my goal, but I do deeply respect the intention of the Bodhisattva path, and also those who practice it. So of course, the Bodhisattva path turned into a superiority construct becomes the Mahayana, with this derogatory idea that then you have the Hinayana, but all of that, it's like rhetorical discourse. It's like not what necessarily in the early days of the emergent Bodhisattva ideal this was about. So I definitely respect the Bodhisattva intention and this altruistic intention. And I do think, honestly, yes, of course, it can come from a normative position, so it can lead to the construction again of this sort of I must be good, I must have compassion, which is the sure way to harden up instead, because you can't develop with this strong must be or should do in your heart. Really, it doesn't work. But I do think that this altruistic intention would be quite a gain for most Western practitioners, or not necessarily Western, but Westernized, or even beyond this obsolete East-West divide, but anyone who is in a postmodern predicament, even in urbanized Asian, kind of societies where there is this individualistic, capitalistic, and post-capitalistic ideology and ideologization of your own practice. So this kind of self-centered goal of improving yourself, this self-betterment project and portfolio that you see in many practitioners who are nominally affiliated with theravada or with vipassana, or various variations. I think all of this kind of underwood would do well with opening the heart to Mahayana or Bodhisattva ideas of taking the other person on board, and which is already, of course, is already present in the early texts. I mean, if you, to whichever extent you are establishing the Buddha's teachings, it's your duty to basically bring as many people as you can, as many other practitioners as you can, to that level of reality. So if you are a stream entrant, it's your duty to bring as many others, or facilitate. I mean, you're not bringing them, but to facilitate the practice of as many others, so that they can be established in the same stage of awakening, and on and on and on. I mean, and so this is absolutely not a novelty, but maybe the emphasis in Mahayana and Bodhisattva practice, could be quite useful for these self-absorbed modernist and postmodern practitioners like us.
Venerable, so many things to ask, and maybe just one last question before we go over to Zoom. In one of your papers, maybe multiple, you reference Stephen Collins's use of this term, a pro-attitude. So having a pro-attitude towards rebirth. So even as one does one's scholarship or thinks about Buddhism, if one has as one's working view of the world, an early Buddhist, theravada view that there is this world, there is the next world, there is rebirth, admitting that and having this attitude towards the concept. How do you balance that with an academia or like a Western skepticism, which is just saying you have to be totally impartial to everything? And this goes back to what you're describing as our, I think, shared non-traditional form of Buddhism, which does go back to these, what we call early Buddhist texts, and are not, taking the practical canons of Buddhaghosa as necessarily normative. But it's a great Buddhism that we're finding, in these early Buddhist texts. Like the through lines are very inspiring, and they do hold up very well in modernity. So how do you balance this, having a pro attitude in a supposedly neutral academia and in just your life in general?
Wow, so this was supposed to be like the last. Yeah. So I mean, if you can bear with more prapancha and proliferation, I mean, I'm happy to try. Well, I mean, as far as this rebirth, business is concerned, I do think that there can be in traditional Theravadins a sort of dogmatic. Embrace or sort of statement. And so it's like, oh no, if you don't believe in that, you cannot practice, or you're not a Buddhist. So it's again, there is, when you go for refuge, there is no contract you have to sign. I believe in this, or I believe in that. There is no credo. So you go for refuge to the extent that this inspires your heart, and to the extent that your provisional intellectual understanding and whichever level of realization of the teachings you have allow you to. So I mean, it just really, I think really this going for refuge meets you where you are, and more than anything else. So I think that kind of dogmatic sort of righteousness doesn't go anywhere, and it's also sort of really, unhelpful. It does, and I think it's also like a defensive position that comes again from an identity stance, or just some sort of to set yourself right, or as the the holder of truth, etc. But of course, you also have the other extreme, which is this idea, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to, what do we do of misogynistic views in the texts, which are, they late developments. So in a way, I think that this idea that anything that doesn't quite fit with my mindset must be early, so kind of reforming these teachings. And definitely, I mean, if the Buddha didn't want to accept rebirth in the same way that he has rejected so many other belief systems of his time, I mean, he would have been perfectly able to emancipate himself from the ideology of his time. I mean, he wasn't, like a naive intellectual or a naive individual. So, I mean, I can't buy, this idea that, poor boy, he was unable to, disentangle himself from the prevalent views of his time. And anyway, if we look at the textual accounts, even in comparative light of the Buddha's awakening, the knowledge of rebirth, one's own past lives, and the causal concatenation between one past life and the next, going backwards, and those, the re-arising or re-arising and passing away of beings. In the traditional textual account of, or like autobiographical account of the Buddha's own awakening, the key teaching on and the key realization on anatta, on not self, is based on this breakthrough. So this breakthrough is based on recollection of past lives. So there is no question that this type of knowledge was instrumental to the way the Buddha's awakening came about. Then, one could question, would it be possible to become a fully awakened Buddha without experiential, non-biased recollection of past lives? I mean, we don't know. I mean, who am I to say? I mean, we're not building some hypothetical Buddhologists here, but definitely what we know is that the Buddha did ground, so this kind of knowledge foregrounded is breakthrough to full awakening. So there is no question that freedom and emancipation is also freedom from rebirth, and this statement that there is this world and the next world, and there are beings who have freed themselves from this and the next world is part of is encoded in the definitions of right view. So I think wrong view, I mean, and I am supported by, I mean, this is not I think, I think based on what I read in the text. So wrong view would just be about an outright denial of this possibility. So I do think that an agnostic position, which honestly acknowledges I don't have direct recollection of past lives, or I don't trust my recollection of past lives because I don't have that level of samadhi or mental development that allows me for sure to know this is not some sort of association or free association or perceptual bias. So to say, if I cannot trust myself, or if I don't have those kind of experiences, I can make room for the fact that these experiences do exist. And so if I don't take this strong no way position and I leave it open, so I am not actively making a statement of wrong view. And this is what what emerges from the discourses. And this is not about making a statement of wrong view as a kind of dogmatically wrong position, and then again this is right, this is wrong. I mean, this is existential. So if I make a statement of wrong view, like a wrong view based or informed statement, I am basically like digging like a hole into my own being, that this is not, there is no way to come out of this. So it's like the Buddha wouldn't have taught the path if it were not possible to walk this path. So I think to the extent that we leave it open, then it's totally fine not to commit ideologically to this to past lives as a belief system, but also not to deny it with this rhetorics of maybe it's a bad word to say, but maybe it's my scholarly conceit here, but cheap or like cheaply made scholastic assessments of what early Buddhism would have been really about. So I just think if we keep it open and then we are prepared to take fully on board the implications of all of this, I think it does us a lot of good. Even if we are not committed to the whole package. So maybe, in terms of practice, like a pro attitude, like a positive, friendly attitude, rather. And then again, I think that it's more, it's just an expression also of our intellectual arrogance, this idea that we do need to take a position. Absolutely, I can't, I come into being because I claim a position, I make a statement, and, I can't exist without making a statement. So I would just flip it also. So where does this urge to come to a definite statement come from? What is it in me that, calls me for, having to embrace some kind of, strong view and to assert it? I think that's much more important, really, in terms of practice than, the right and wrong content of the view as such. It's, that's how I would say. So maybe like a pro attitude also in the sense of calling into question the need to take a position and this kind of value, implicit value that we attribute to having a position on everything and having our own thing to say, on each and everything.
Venerable, that was wonderful. And I think we do have to wrap up. And we'll paste the Zoom. We'll have to paste the Zoom link into the chat for people to jump over there. You just visited the US, and I'm curious, just our final question, what was your kind of strangest impression from your time on the West Coast in terms of your encounter with quintessential American culture?
Oh, I had a wonderful time.
Okay, good.
Maybe I had so many preconceived ideas and low expectations. I'm just pulling your leg. But I was really, it's been really a very wonderful, constructive time for me. And I do really appreciate, also this sense of, this sense of openness in a way, and, being open to things can happen. I think in Europe, particularly like Southern Europe, which is, where I come from, because of this, like heaviness of history, and also, like history of, colonial kind of stuff in Southern Italy, which is where I come from, and all these invasions and being, under like other powers, we come with this sense of, things are not going to work out, there is this kind of looming defeat, which is the opposite of maybe this exaggerated, at times like delirium of this, American kind of thing, everything is possible. But, like emotionally for me, it was quite refreshing, to be, by default things might happen, rather than by default you're going to be defeated, or this is going to go wrong or not work. But yes, of course, this is true to the extent that you are, within, the range of privilege. So this is most definitely not the case for those Americans or those who live in America who don't have access to this kind of, finger snap, okay, let's make things happen. So this also comes from, having been in a very privileged position as a scholar, in a kind of top-ranking university, invited and allegedly like white person, although maybe I don't really feel in that way, not being like a native speaker or not sharing that kind of conditioning. So I definitely don't feel on that side of the fence. And also the mannerisms are very different, the ways of communication are very different. So I at the same time I was very self-conscious of myself and of my non-American compliant too direct ways things like that. But yeah, that being said, I think it's been wonderful for me. It's been above my expectations, and maybe also because I had wonderful hosts and wonderful students, fresh hair. Yeah, it was lovely.
Well, Venerable, we really want to invite you to visit us in Seattle, honestly. And we've had, some other West Coast connections of yours who are here as well. Venerable Tata Loka, Aranya Bodhi, and Dhammadinna as well. And yeah, Venerable, it's a real pleasure. I'm just really happy that we actually got to do this, and we hope we get you on again soon and maybe get to meet you in person. And for those who want, we're going to jump over to Zoom now. So if you'd like a longer chance to talk to Venerable, then you can do so there. Venerable.
Thank you for this conversation. It was nice. Yeah,
it was wonderful.
But you've got to talk yourself, next time. So
no, this is great.
So we just swap, and okay. So then I'll just sign out from here and see you on Zoom.